Harold Whitaker hadn't expected much from his wedding night. At 67, a man knows better than to hold Hollywood notions about such things. But he'd expected something, some warmth, some sign that the woman beside him, Diane, his bride of 6 hours, wanted to be there. "I'm exhausted, honey," she'd said, turning away in the December darkness. Tomorrow? Tomorrow became the next night, and the next. By the time Harold started marking X's on the calendar by his bedside, 30 days had passed. 30 nights of polite refusals, and the particular shame that comes when you're too old to complain about it. He was lying awake on that 30th night when Diane's phone lit up on the nightstand. Harold saw the text before he could stop himself. "How much longer? M." His hand froze halfway to the lamp switch. Who the hell was M? The next morning, Harold burned the eggs. He stood at Betty's old stove, his stove now. He had to keep reminding himself, watching smoke curl toward the ceiling while his mind stayed fixed on that text message. How much longer? Like Diane was counting down to something. Like their marriage had an expiration date he hadn't been told about. Good Lord, Harold. Diane swept into the kitchen, waving a dish towel at the smoke. "You trying to burn the house down?" She took the spatula from his hand without asking, scraped the ruined eggs into the trash. Her movements were efficient, claiming. Within minutes, she'd rearranged the spice rack Betty had organized one way for 40 years, moved the coffee mugs to a different cabinet. Harold watched her hum while she worked. Not stressed, not guilty, just content. "I need to run to Terre Haute today," she said, not looking at him. "Mom's feeling poorly. I could come along." "No need. Too quick. She's not comfortable with strangers yet." Harold's jaw tightened. "We've been married a month. I'm not a stranger." Diane smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course not, honey. I just meant, well, you know how old people can be about their privacy." She kissed his cheek, a dry, performative thing, and left him standing in a kitchen that used to be Betty's, but now felt like it belonged to no one. By noon, Harold needed fence nails and an excuse to be around people who didn't make him feel like he was losing his mind. Vic's Hardware had both. "Well, look who's here," Vic called out the moment Harold walked through the door. "How's married life treating you, Harry?" Two other men by the paint counter turned to look. Harold felt his face go hot. "Can't complain," he said, heading for the fasteners aisle. But Vic wasn't done. He came around the counter, grinning like a man who'd just told the world's best joke. "Bet you're not getting much sleep these days, eh?" He elbowed Harold's ribs. "Newlyweds and all." And the other men chuckled. One of them, Pete Garrison from the grain elevator, said, lucky bastard. "I've been married 30 years, sleep like the dead now." More laughter. Harold forced his mouth into something that might pass for a smile, grabbed a box of nails he didn't really need, and headed for the register. "That'll be $6.50, Vic said, still grinning. Harold handed over a 10, waited for change, while Pete and the other man kept up their commentary about the mysteries of matrimony, about how youth and beauty came with certain expectations, about how Harold better keep up his strength. The words landed like fists. Cal Brewster walked in just as Harold was pocketing his change. Their eyes met, Cal's expression shifting from friendly to concerned in the space of a heartbeat. "That look said, 'I see you,' said something's wrong here." Harold broke contact first, muttered something about needing to get home, and pushed out into the January cold. In his truck, he sat for 10 minutes before starting the engine. The performance of being a satisfied newlywed had left him hollowed out, and everyone in town probably thought the same thing Pete did, that Harold was living some late-life fantasy with a younger woman, if they only knew. He stopped at Cal's feed store on the way home. Couldn't say why exactly. Just knew he needed to be around someone who didn't assume, didn't joke, didn't make him feel like a fool. Cal was at the counter, doing inventory. He looked up when Harold entered, set down his clipboard, and reached for the coffee pot without a word. Poured Harold a cup in the chip mug that had become his over years of these visits. 3 scoops of sugar, no cream, the way Harold took it. "Heard Vic giving you a hard time," Cal said quietly. "Vic means well." "Don't make it less stupid." Cal refilled his own cup, leaned against the counter. "You doing all right, Harold?" "Fine, just adjusting." Cal nodded slow, like he was deciding something. Then, "Saw Diane's car at the U-Store Tuesday afternoon. White Camry, license plate starts with Mar. That hers?" Harold's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. "She was visiting her mother Tuesday. Must have stopped there on the way then." The words hung between them. Harold set his cup down careful, like it might break. "Why would she need a storage unit? We got a whole barn." "Don't know, just thought it was odd is all." Cal picked up his clipboard again, gave Harold space to think. "You know where I am if you need anything." Harold left without finishing his coffee. He drove past the U store on County Road 400, told himself he was just heading home the long way, told himself he wasn't checking up on his wife like some paranoid old man. But there it was, Diane's white Camry parked in front of Unit 127. Harold kept driving, hands tight on the wheel, knuckles going white. In the rearview mirror, he saw a man, couldn't make out features from this distance, helping Diane load something into the unit, something big and wrapped in a tarp. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark listening to Diane breathe beside him, even and unconcerned. Around 2 in the morning, he got up, padded to the kitchen in his socks, looking for aspirin, he told himself. Just needed something for the headache that had been building since Vic's hardware store. He found the aspirin in Diane's purse, also found a motel receipt from the Sunrise Inn dated 3 days ago, the same day she'd claimed to be at Bible study. And beneath that, wrapped in a scarf, a phone he'd never seen before. A cheap flip phone, the kind you buy at gas stations. Harold's hands shook as he opened it, scrolled through the text messages. The old man's eager to sign. Another month, maybe. How much you think we can get for the equipment? Patience, babe. Almost done. All two are from a contact labeled simply M. Harold stood in his kitchen, Betty's kitchen, the one where they'd raised Emma, where they'd had 43 years of morning coffee and quiet evenings, and felt the floor tilt beneath him. He put everything back exactly as he'd found it, closed the purse, took his aspirin, went back to bed, and lay there in the dark, listening to his wife sleep, and understood with cold certainty that he was living with a stranger who was counting down to something. The insurance agent arrived on a Thursday morning when the temperature hadn't climbed above 15 degrees. Harold watched through the window as Tom Fletcher's sedan pulled into the drive, exhaust hanging white in the frozen air. "He's here," Diane called from the bedroom, her voice bright in a way it never was when they were alone. By the time Tom knocked, Diane had transformed. She met him at the door with a smile that could melt ice, touched Harold's shoulder as they settled at the kitchen table, called him honey twice in the first 5 minutes. Harold felt something twist in his chest. This warmth, this affection. Where the hell was it every other hour of the day? "Just need to update the beneficiaries," Tom said, spreading papers across the table. "And Diane mentioned you'd like to add her to the property deed? That's smart thinking. Estate planning gets complicated without proper titles." "Did I mention that?" Harold looked at Diane. She squeezed his hand. Her fingers felt like they were made of wax, warm, but somehow artificial. "We talked about it last week, remember? Like real married folks do. Combined assets." Had they talked about it? Harold's memory felt slippery lately. Judge Patterson had made that comment about him seeming forgetful after that stop sign incident in December. Maybe Diane was right. "It's standard for married couples," Tom said. "Makes everything simpler down the road." Harold signed where Tom pointed. 4 documents, maybe 5. His attention kept snagging on the way Diane was playing with his collar. The performance of devotion. So different from the cold shoulder he got every night. "Just need to verify your legal name for the beneficiary form," Tom said to Diane. "Full maiden name and any previous married names." Diane's hand stilled on Harold's shoulder, just for a second. "Diane Marie Whitaker, now. Maiden name was Stevens. And previous marriages." "Just one. Ancient history." She laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "Divorced years ago. Stevens was my married name from that." Tom made a note, moved on. But Harold caught it. The way her fingers had tightened on his shoulder when Tom asked. The way she'd changed the subject fast, offered Tom cookies, anything to keep moving forward. When Tom left 20 minutes later, Diane's warmth evaporated like steam off a kettle. She went to the bedroom without a word, closed the door. Harold heard the lock click. That night, she claimed a headache, again. 3 days later, Harold went looking for Betty's quilt. It was a ritual he'd kept since she died. Opening the cedar chest once a week, touching the quilt she'd spent 10 years making, every stitch by hand. 43 squares, one for each year of their marriage. The last square she'd finished 2 weeks before the cancer took her. The chest was empty. Harold stared at the bare wood bottom like it might explain itself. He searched the house methodically. Closets, basement, the spare room Diane had claimed for her yoga stuff. The quilt was gone. So were Betty's recipe cards, the wedding photo that used to hang in the hallway, the china cabinet that had been Betty's grandmother's. He waited up for Diane. She came home at 9, smelling like wine and someone else's cigarettes. "Where's Betty's quilt?" Harold kept his voice level. Didn't trust what might come out if he let it loose. "What quilt?" "The one from the cedar chest. Betty made it." Diane sighed, set down her purse. "Honey, I've never seen a quilt in that chest. Are you sure it was there?" "I'm sure." "When was the last time you looked?" Harold tried to remember. Week before the wedding? 2 weeks? Time had gotten slippery since Betty died. "You've been forgetting things lately," Diane said, her voice soft with what might have been concern or might have been something else. The anniversary dinner you forgot to make reservations for, that doctor's appointment you missed. I'm not senile. No one said you were. She touched his cheek. Another performance, he realized now. She only touched him when she wanted something. But you're under a lot of stress. New marriage, adjusting, missing Betty. It's natural to be confused sometimes. She went to bed, left Harold standing in the living room, wondering if he was losing his mind, or if his wife was trying to make him think he was. He found the quilt 2 days later, purely by accident. Had to go downtown to pay the property tax, passed second chance consignment on his way to the courthouse. And there it was, in the window. Betty's quilt, 43 squares of her life and love, tagged at $85. Harold stood on the sidewalk in the February wind and felt something crack open in his chest. The tag had a seller code, DW23, Diane Whitaker, February 3rd, 3 days ago. She'd sold his dead wife's work like it was yard sale junk. He went inside. The clerk, a woman named Susan who'd gone to church with Betty, looked embarrassed when she saw him. That quilt in the window, Harold said. I'll take it. Oh, Harold, I didn't know. The lady who brought it said, I know what she said. I'll take it. And he paid $85 cash, his own money, buying back his own wife's 43 years of evening work. Susan wrapped it in brown paper, wouldn't meet his eyes. That same lady's brought in quite a few nice things lately, she said quietly. Antiques mostly. China cabinet, some tools, picture frames. Said she was downsizing. Harold took the quilt to his truck, sat in the cab with it in his lap. Betty's stitches under his fingers, tight and even, the way she did everything. He could almost see her in the rocking chair, needle moving in lamplight, humming hymns while she worked. Each stitch a memory, each square a year they'd built together. And Diane had priced it at $85. He drove home with the quilt hidden in the barn workshop, locked in the cabinet where he kept his good tools. That night at dinner, Diane mentioned they should clean out all that old junk in the barn. Make some space, maybe sell some of it. Harold cut his pork chop, chewed slow. Nothing in that barn is for sale. Diane's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her eyes went flat for just a second, calculation running behind them like gears turning. Then she smiled. Of course, honey, whatever you think. But he'd seen it, that flash of something cold and appraising, like she was measuring his resistance, deciding how much force it would take to break him down. He'd just shown her he was paying attention now, and that, Harold realized as he lay awake that night listening to her breathe, might have been a mistake. Harold started going to Wednesday evening service again. Not for God, exactly, though he figured the Lord wouldn't mind a man showing up for the wrong reasons if he showed up honest. He went because the church was somewhere Diane had never been with him. Somewhere that was still his. He sat in the back pew where he and Betty used to sit, hymn book open to songs he'd known since childhood. The familiar words, the organ that wheezed on the high notes, the smell of old wood and lemon polish. It steadied something in him that had come loose, until he heard Barb Henderson's voice from 2 rows up. Married that young thing, and now look at him. She wasn't whispering quite soft enough. Walks like a man carrying shame. Her friend, Linda somebody, Harold couldn't remember, whispered back, well, you know what they say about December and May. That's a young woman's patience being tested. Harold kept his eyes on the hymnal. Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. The words blurred. He stood for communion, took the wafer and grape juice, went back to his seat like a man walking underwater. After service, the secretary, Joanne, who'd known Betty since grade school, stopped him at the door. Where's Diane tonight, Harold? Under the weather. The lie came easy now. He'd had practice. She sends her regrets. Joanne's eyes said she knew exactly what kind of weather Diane was under. You tell her we're praying for her. In the parking lot, Harold sat in his truck watching families leave together. Couples holding hymnals, kids running ahead to the cars. He thought about Betty's hand in his every Sunday for 43 years, how she'd always held on a little tighter during the final hymn. He drove to the VFW hall instead of going home. Needed to be somewhere Diane had never contaminated with her performance. The man appeared on a Thursday afternoon while Harold was in the barn, trying to coax life back into the old tractor. Rusty, Harold's 12-year-old mutt who'd been Betty's shadow and was now his, started barking like the world was ending. Harold stepped out into February sunshine that gave light but no heat. A stranger stood on the porch, peering through the kitchen window with his hands cupped around his face. Help you? Harold called out. The man turned, all easy smiles. 40-something, gym-built, wearing clothes too nice for farm country. Hey there, looking for Diane. Old friend passing through. Rusty had Harold's pant leg in his teeth now, pulling. The dog, who never barked, who never growled, was going feral. Harold had to grab his collar to keep him from charging. She's not here. Damn. Long way to drive for nothing. The man came down off the porch, eyes sweeping the property like he was cataloging everything he saw. Nice place you got. Real nice. Worth a lot, I'd bet. Something cold crawled up Harold's spine. Can I give her a name? Nah, she'll know who came by. The man was already heading to his truck, a new Ford F-250, license plate starting with MAR. You take care now. He drove off, but Rusty kept barking at the road for a solid hour. Harold had to lock him in the barn to get any peace. That night, Harold noticed his good truck keys were missing from the hook by the door. You seen my keys? He asked at dinner. Diane looked up from her phone. Oh, I borrowed your truck for errands. Hope that's okay? She'd never driven his truck before, never asked to. Harold had a spare set in the barn, got them after dinner. But something about her casual theft of his keys, not asking, just taking, felt like another piece of him being carried off. Like she was testing how much she could take before he noticed. Cal showed up at closing time on Friday with a proposition. Got a favor to ask, he said, setting a six-pack of Coors on Harold's kitchen table. Need someone to cover the store tomorrow. Dale's got his bowling tournament. Harold knew Dale ran the U-Store It facility. Knew Cal's bowling league met on Thursdays, not Saturdays. Knew this was about something else. You want to tell me what's really going on? Cal popped open a beer, slid one to Harold. Been keeping an eye on things. That storage unit I mentioned? Your wife's been there regular. Her and some man, loading equipment. Equipment? Farm equipment, antiques, tools, things I'd recognize as yours if I saw them in broad daylight. Cal pulled out his phone, showed Harold a photo. Diane and the stranger from the porch, loading what looked like Betty's china cabinet into Unit 127. Been documenting it, 3 weeks now. Harold stared at the photo. The date stamp said February 10th, Tuesday, the day Diane claimed she'd been visiting her sick mother. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Needed enough to make it stick. Can't accuse a man's wife of theft on just a hunch. Cal scrolled through more photos, different days, different items. A systematic inventory of Harold's life being boxed up and hidden. Also called Dale. He's a friend, plays in our bowling league. Got the rental agreement. Your wife paid 6 months up front, cash. 6 months. Harold did the math. They'd been married 1 month. She'd rented that unit 2 weeks before the wedding. She planned this, his voice came out flat, before she even married me. Cal didn't answer. Didn't need to. The photo said everything. They sat in silence, drinking beer while the kitchen clock ticked toward 8. Outside, the February wind rattled the old windows. The ones Harold kept meaning to replace but never did because Betty had liked the way they whistled in storms. There's more, Cal said finally. That man helping her, I ran his plates. Truck's registered to a Marcus Webb. Did some asking around. He's been staying at the Sunrise Inn, same motel your wife's car's been parked at 3-4 times a week. Marcus Webb. M. Harold thought about that text message. How much longer? They're together, he said. Looks that way. Harold finished his beer. What would you do? Cal was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'd get a lawyer, document everything, and I'd be real careful about what I sign from here on out. You think she's trying to steal the farm? I think she's already stealing it, piece by piece. Now Cal stood, gathered his photos back into his phone. Question is what you want to do about it. After Cal left, Harold sat at the kitchen table until past midnight. Diane came home at 10, kissed his forehead, another performance, and went to bed. Harold stayed put, thinking about that storage unit full of Betty's things, his things, their life together being cataloged and priced like merchandise, about the man named Marcus helping his wife steal from him, about how Diane had planned this before she'd even said I do. Around 1 in the morning, Rusty scratched at the door. Harold let him in, and the dog immediately tried to go to the bedroom. Got halfway down the hall before he stopped, whined, and came back to Harold. Wouldn't go near that bedroom while Diane was in it. Even the dog knew something Harold was only beginning to understand. There was an enemy in his house, sleeping in his bed, wearing his dead wife's ring, and he'd invited her in. Emma Whitaker's phone buzzed during her lunch break. She ignored it. Tuesdays were for processing the backlog of fraud cases that paid her rent in Indianapolis. 3 corporate embezzlement files sat open on her desk, and somewhere in the spreadsheets was a pattern she couldn't quite see yet. Her coworker Janet stuck her head in. You going home for Easter? Emma didn't look up. We're not really talking. Still, Emma, it's been 3 years. He married someone 6 weeks after Mom died. 6 weeks. The words came out sharper than she meant them to. I'm supposed to just pretend that's normal? Janet retreated. Emma went back to her spreadsheets, but the numbers wouldn't line up anymore. She kept seeing her father at the funeral, Betty Whitaker, beloved wife and mother, standing there like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe. Emma had stayed 2 weeks after, made sure he was eating, made sure the house was clean. Then she'd gone back to Indianapolis. And 3 months later, Dad had called to say he was getting remarried. To someone named Diane, someone he'd met at the senior center. Emma had said things. He'd said things. Neither of them had called since. The mailroom buzzed her at 2. Package for you. No return address. The manila envelope was thin, unmarked except for her name. Emma opened it at her desk. Photos spilled out. Time-stamped, dated, professional-looking surveillance shots. A woman, younger, attractive, loading items into a storage unit. A man helping her, muscular build, expensive truck. Farm equipment in the background, antiques, tools. Emma's fraud investigator brain kicked in automatically. She studied the timestamps. Tuesday 2 p.m., Thursday 11 a.m., Saturday 3 p.m. Regular pattern, coordinated operation. The woman's face and profile in one shot. Emma's stomach dropped. She knew that face. The Facebook photos Dad had posted, Diane, his wife. A handwritten note fell from the envelope. Thought you'd want to know. A friend. Emma pulled up public records on her computer, typed Diane Whitaker, marriage, Indiana. Found Diane Marie Webb, married to Marcus Anthony Webb, October 14, 2012, Marion County. Status active. No divorce decree, no dissolution. Still married. Emma's hands started shaking. Her father's marriage was invalid, fraudulent, which meant everything else, property transfers, beneficiary changes, asset access, was part of a con. She stared at her phone. Dad's contact sat there like an accusation. 3 years of silence, and now this. Her thumb hovered over the call button, pressed. Harold's phone rang during dinner. Diane was picking at her salad, texting someone under the table. She'd stopped pretending to care if he noticed. Emma Mobile lit up the screen. Harold's hand shook, picking it up. Em? Hi, Dad. Long pause. He could hear traffic in the background, her breathing. Been a while. Yeah. Another pause. Harold stood, walked to the living room. Diane's eyes tracked him, but she didn't follow. Listen, Emma said. How are you? How's Diane? She said the name like it tasted wrong. Harold felt something crack open in his chest. She's fine. We're fine. Dad. Emma's voice changed, became the one she used for work, sharp and focused. I need to ask you something. Has Diane been selling things, Mom's things? Harold stopped breathing. Why would you ask that? Have you noticed anything strange? Money moving around? Papers you don't remember signing? Em, I have to go. Diane had appeared in the doorway. Who's on the phone, honey? It's not a good time, Harold said into the phone. Dad, wait, don't come here. It's not, just don't. I'm coming home. Emma? I know, Dad. I know what she is. I'm coming home. The line went dead. Harold stood holding the phone, aware of Diane watching him from across the room. That was Emma? Something sharp lived behind her smile now. What did she want? Just checking in. After 3 years, she just checks in? Diane moved closer. What did you tell her? That we're fine. Are we, Harold? Her voice went soft, dangerous. Are we fine? That night, Harold lay awake listening to Diane breathe. Around midnight, she got up, took her phone to the bathroom. He heard her whispered conversation through the door. Couldn't make out words, but the tone was urgent. By morning, an ice storm warning scrolled across the Weather Channel. Travel not recommended. Roads dangerous. Emma would be driving straight into it. Emma packed while the weather lady promised black ice and power outages. Laptop, phone chargers, overnight bag. The fraud case files could wait. Everything could wait. She looked at her mother's photo on the nightstand. Betty Whitaker, smiling in the garden she'd loved. Dead 18 months and already being erased. I know, Mom, Emma said to the photo. I should have come sooner. She loaded her car in the apartment parking lot while freezing rain started to fall. The drive to the farm was 2 hours on a good day. Today it might take 4. Her phone rang. Dad calling back. Turn around, Em. Roads are bad. So is what's happening to you. I didn't want you to see this. Emma started the car, cranked the heat. I don't care what you want right now. I care that you're safe. I'm 2 hours out. Maybe 3 with the weather. She could hear him breathing, trying to decide if his pride was worth her safety. She planned it, he said finally. Before the wedding, she'd already rented a storage unit, already had someone helping her. His name's Marcus Webb. He's her husband, the real one. Silence on the line. Emma heard it land, the weight of being married to someone who was already married to someone else. How did you... Public records. Dad, I work fraud cases. This is what I do. Emma pulled onto I-70, windshield wipers fighting the ice. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. You're here now. Damn right I am. Don't let her sign anything else. Don't let her in the barn. Or the basement. And Dad, Don't eat or drink anything she gives you that you didn't prepare yourself. I think she's already stealing from you. I think her husband's been in your house. I think they've done this before. Emma's car skidded slightly. She corrected, kept driving. And I think people get desperate when they're close to a big score. After they hung up, Emma drove through ice that made the highway look like glass. Country music played on the radio. Stations her dad had programmed into her car the last time she'd visited, back before everything went wrong. She thought about all the fraud cases she'd solved for strangers, all the elderly victims she'd helped get justice, and she'd missed the con happening to her own father. Not anymore. The highway stretched white ahead of her, ice accumulating on the wipers. 2 hours to home, if she didn't slide off the road first. Emma pressed the accelerator and drove into the storm. Harold sat in his truck in the courthouse parking lot, engine running for heat, trying to convince himself he wasn't about to do something shameful. Checking up on your wife? That's what this was, the kind of thing suspicious men did. Men who didn't trust. Men whose paranoia ate them alive. But Emma's words kept circling, I know what she is. He turned off the engine. The cold came through immediately. February had teeth this year. Across the lot, the Marion County Courthouse stood like it had since 1898, limestone and certainty. Public records were public for a reason. Harold climbed the steps like a man walking to his own hanging. Inside, marble echoed, the smell of lemon cleaner and old wood, same as the church. He found the property records office on the second floor, signed the logbook, asked the clerk about deed transfers on his address. The young man, couldn't be more than 25, pulled up the file without judgment. You want copies? Harold looked at the screen. 2 quitclaim deeds. Both transferring portions of his property to Diane Whitaker, both dated January 8th, the day the insurance agent came. Both with his signature at the bottom. He'd signed them. He remembered the insurance papers, the stack of documents Tom had put in front of him. But he didn't remember these. Didn't remember transferring 40 acres of Betty's family land to a woman he'd known 6 weeks. Yeah, Harold said, his voice coming from somewhere far away. I'll take copies. $5. That's what it cost to see how he'd been robbed in his own kitchen. He stood in the hallway holding the photocopies. People moving around him like water around a stone. His hands were shaking. At 67, a man's hands shake sometimes. Cold weather, too much coffee, just getting old. But this was different. This was watching your whole life slide out from under you and not being able to stop it. The marriage records office was on the first floor. Harold told himself he was just being thorough. Told himself he'd check, find everything legitimate, feel foolish for doubting. Emma had probably made a mistake. Public records got mixed up sometimes. He opened the heavy registry book, ran his finger down the entries. Last names, starting with W. Whitaker, Harold. December 20th, 2024, Diane Marie Whitaker. But the previous page, Webb, Diane Marie, married to Webb, Marcus Anthony. October 14th, 2012, Marion County. Status, active. No divorce, no dissolution, no legal end. Harold sat down on the bench by the window. Outside, people were going about their normal Thursday. Getting coffee, parking cars, living lives where their marriages were real and their wives were who they said they were. His marriage certificate was a lie. A piece of paper with no legal weight. He'd stood in front of Pastor Davidson and God and made promises to a woman who was already promising someone else. You need help, sir? Harold looked up. A woman stood there. Marge Hopkins, the county clerk he'd seen at church. She'd known Betty, had brought casseroles after the funeral. Harold couldn't finish the sentence. Marge glanced at the registry book, at Harold's face, and something shifted in her expression. If someone's already married and they marry someone else, that's bigamy. It's a criminal offense. What if the second person didn't know? Then they're a victim. Marge sat down beside him, her voice low. Harold, I can't give you legal advice. You'd need a lawyer for that, but all marriage records are public. Anyone can look. She stood, walked to her desk, came back with a pamphlet. We had training last year, marriage fraud schemes, mostly out of Indianapolis, but some rural. There's patterns. Same names, same methods. Harold took the pamphlet. It described exactly what was happening to him. Targeting recent widowers, quick courtships, asset transfers, coordinated teams. Sheriff Dietrich takes these things seriously, Marge said quietly. If someone wanted to file a complaint. After she left, Harold sat reading the pamphlet. Every page was a mirror. Every warning sign was something he'd ignored. The rushed timeline. The isolation from family, the document signing, the third-party male friend. He pulled out his phone. Searched. Marcus Webb, Indiana, criminal record. Found it in 30 seconds. Marcus Anthony Webb, age 51, convicted of check fraud 1998, served 3 years at Pendleton Correctional, released 2001. No conviction since, but that didn't mean he'd stopped working. Just meant he'd gotten better at not getting caught. Harold's phone buzzed. Text from Cal. Need to talk. Tonight, your place or mine. Harold typed back, mine, after she's asleep. He left the courthouse with photocopies in his pocket. Proof of theft, proof of fraud, proof that the woman in his house was a professional. She'd done this before. Done it enough to have a system, a partner, a storage unit rented before she'd even said, I love you. It's in his truck. Harold didn't start the engine right away. Just sat there in the February cold, watching his breath fog the windows. He'd thought loneliness was the worst thing. Thought coming home to an empty house, eating dinner alone, sleeping in a bed that still smelled like Betty's lilac soap, he'd thought that was rock bottom. But this was worse. This was knowing he'd been so desperate for company that he'd married a ghost, a performance. A woman who was counting down the days until she could disappear with everything Betty had left behind. His phone buzzed again. Emma, 40 minutes out. Roads are hell, but I'm coming. Harold started the truck. He needed to get home before Emma did. Needed to make sure Diane didn't know anything was wrong. Because if she suspected, if Marcus suspected, they'd disappear. And 40 years of his life would disappear with them. He drove home carefully, practicing his face in the rearview mirror, practicing how to look like a man who didn't know he was living with criminals. The farm appeared through the gray afternoon. White clapboard house, red barn, 180 acres of land that went back 4 generations. His grandfather had cleared those fields. His father had built that barn. Betty had planted every tree in the windbreak, and Diane was trying to take it all. Harold parked, went inside. Diane was on the phone, in the bedroom, door closed. He could hear her voice through the wood, sharper than the honey tone she used with him. He went to the kitchen, started coffee. 3 scoops, 1 for the pot, Betty's way. His hands were steadier now. Something had settled in him during that drive home. She'd wanted him to feel old, confused, incompetent, wanted him to doubt himself, question his memory, accept that forgetting where he signed away his property was just what happened when you got old. But Harold had survived Korea, had outlasted cancer that took his wife, had raised a daughter alone after Betty died, had run a farm for 47 years, through droughts and floods and every damn thing the world could throw at him. He wasn't confused, he wasn't senile, he was being robbed, and that was different. The coffee finished brewing. Harold poured a cup, stood at the window watching the driveway, waiting for Emma's car, waiting for Cal's truck after dark, waiting for the moment when he stopped being a victim and started being something else. Emma's headlights cut through the ice storm around 5:30. Harold watched from the window as she parked, grabbed a bag from her back seat, and ran for the porch. He opened the door before she could knock. Jesus, Dad. She was ice-covered, shaking. Roads are terrible. He pulled her inside, took her coat. 3 years since he'd seen her, and she looked like Betty around the eyes. That same way of seeing right through whatever you were trying to hide. Where is she? Bedroom. On the phone with someone. Emma set her bag down, pulled out her laptop. We need to talk before she comes out. You said she had documents? Harold got the photocopies from his truck. Deed transfers, marriage certificate, the fraud pamphlet. Spread them on the kitchen table while Emma's computer booted up. This is systematic, Emma said, studying the deeds. She got you to sign during emotional manipulation. Classic fraud technique. She pulled up files on her screen. I did research on the drive. Marcus Webb has a pattern. 3 prior arrests for fraud, but only 1 conviction. Smart enough to learn, dumb enough to get caught eventually. How many others? That I could find? 3 farms in the last 5 years. Aurora, Illinois. Fort Wayne. Bloomington, all the same. Recent widowers, quick marriage, asset transfer, they disappear. Emma looked up. You're the 4th, Dad, and this time they're not getting away with it. The bedroom door opened. Diane appeared, hair perfect, smile locked in place. Then she saw Emma. Well, this is a surprise. Her voice was syrup over ice. Emma, right? Harold's mentioned you. I bet he has. Emma stood, didn't offer her hand. Nice to finally meet my stepmother. Though, technically, you're not, are you? Diane's smile didn't flicker. I don't know what you mean. You're still married. To Marcus Webb, which makes your marriage to my father invalid, which makes every document you've had him sign fraudulent. Emma's voice was professional, cold. I work insurance fraud. This is what I do, and you made it easy. For just a second, Diane's mask slipped. Harold saw what lived underneath. Pure calculation, no warmth, just a woman deciding how much damage control she needed. Then the mask came back. Harold, honey, what is she talking about? Don't. Harold's voice came out harder than he'd meant it. I went to the courthouse. I know about Marcus, about the storage unit, about the other farms. Diane sat down at the table, poured herself coffee like they were discussing weather. And what exactly do you think you know? That you planned this before you married me. That you're stealing from me piece by piece. That Marcus is your husband, not me. You can prove that? Emma slid the marriage certificate copies across the table. Public record. Still married, no divorce decree, which makes you guilty of bigamy, fraud, and theft. That's before we get to the equipment in the storage unit. Diane sipped her coffee, smiled. And who do you think will believe you? She stood, walked to Harold, touched his shoulder. He flinched away, and her smile went sharp. Let's think about this, Harold. You're a 67-year-old man who married a woman you barely knew 6 weeks after your wife died. Judge Patterson already thinks you're losing it. Everyone in town thinks you're a foolish old man having a midlife crisis 20 years late. And that's not who wins in court, the confused widower who can't remember signing documents, who forgets appointments, who married a stranger because he couldn't stand being alone. Her voice was surgical, finding every nerve. Or the concerned wife trying to help her declining husband manage his affairs. She leaned closer. Harold could smell her perfume, that chemical floral that had replaced Betty's lilac soap. You couldn't satisfy a woman at 67. You couldn't keep your daughter from leaving. You couldn't even see you were being conned by someone half your age. What makes you think anyone will take you seriously? Emma stood. Because we have evidence, documentation, a pattern of criminal activity, your husband's record, the storage unit rental agreement, and a county clerk who's already called the sheriff. Diane's face went still. You didn't know about Marge, did you? Emma pulled out her phone. She called Sheriff Dietrich this afternoon, told him everything. He's very interested in talking to you and Marcus. You're bluffing. Try me. Emma met her eyes. I've been building fraud cases for 10 years. You're good, but you're not that good. You left trails. Everyone does. Diane grabbed her purse, her phone. Harold, I'm going to visit my mother. We'll discuss this when everyone calms down. Your mother's been dead 3 years, Emma said quietly. I checked. Margaret Stevens died January 2022. So where have you really been going? Diane stopped at the door, turned. The mask was gone now. What looked back was cold and hard and utterly empty. You'll still die alone, old man. Her voice was flat, conversational. That's what you were so afraid of, wasn't it? Being alone. That's why you were so easy. She smiled. I gave you a choice. Sign everything over. We split the proceeds. I leave quietly. Or we do this the hard way. Courtroom drama, everyone watching you try to explain how you let yourself get swindled. Either way, I get paid. But one way, you keep what's left of your dignity. She walked out. Her car started, tires spinning on ice, then caught. Taillights disappeared into the storm. Harold stood in his kitchen, Betty's kitchen, feeling like someone had scooped out his insides and left just the shell standing. Dad, Emma touched his arm. She's wrong. About all of it. Is she? Yes. Emma's voice cracked. You're not alone. You're not confused. You're not the fool she tried to make you feel like. She pulled out a chair, sat him down. You're a man who wanted to believe the best in someone. There's nothing shameful in that. But Harold couldn't hear her, could only hear Diane's words on repeat. Die alone. That's what you were afraid of. She'd known exactly where to cut. Harold sat in Betty's rocking chair after Emma went to her old room. The ice storm had knocked out power around 9. They'd lit candles, made sandwiches, tried to pretend this was normal. Emma had her laptop running on battery, building case files, contacting lawyers. Harold just sat, watching ice accumulate on the windows, each layer making the world outside more distant. He'd been a fool. Married a woman he barely knew because his bed was empty and his table was set for one, and every evening he came home to a house that echoed. Because at the VFW hall, men made jokes about old bachelors who couldn't even catch a cold, let alone a woman. Because the church ladies looked at him with pity. So he'd said yes to the first person who smiled at him, who touched his hand, who made him feel like maybe 67 wasn't too old for a second chance. And she'd been counting down from day one. How much longer? Around 2 a.m., he heard a diesel engine. Headlights swept the drive. Harold stood, moved to the window. Cal's truck, snow-covered, pulling up to the porch. Harold opened the door before Cal could knock. His friend stood there holding a banker's box, ice in his beard, looking like he'd driven through hell. Got something to show you, Cal said. You're not alone in this. Behind Cal's truck, another set of headlights appeared. Emma's car, she must have heard the engine, come out to see. Cal set the box on the kitchen table, started pulling out files, photos, receipts, timeline, a recording on his phone. Marcus Webb's voice bragging at Lucky's bar about the old man and easy money, and been documenting for 3 weeks, Cal said, since I saw her at the storage unit. Figured you'd need evidence. Figured you'd need proof you weren't crazy. Emma appeared in the doorway, saw the evidence, saw her father's face. She crossed the room, and hugged him. First time in 3 years. Harold felt something break open in his chest. "You're not fighting this alone," Cal said. "Never were." Harold looked at the two of them, his friend who'd spent weeks building a case, his daughter who'd driven through a storm to get here. He thought about Marge at the courthouse, quietly helping, about Dale at the storage facility, risking his job to give information, about how Diane had told him he was alone, and she'd been wrong. "What do we do?" Harold's voice came out rough. Emma wiped her eyes, went straight to business. "We catch them in the act. One more fraudulent transfer with authorities present. That's what we need." How?" "You call her tomorrow, tell her you're ready to sign, that you want it done at the courthouse. All official, Friday morning. She'll suspect. Maybe. But her greed will override it." Emma pulled out her laptop. "I've seen it 100 times. They can't help themselves. The closer they get, the sloppier they become." Cal nodded. "And we'll have Sheriff Dietrich there, the county attorney, everyone who matters." Harold sat down at the table, looking at 3 weeks of Cal's work, photos of his life being stolen, documentation of his shame. Evidence that he'd been blind, but also evidence that people cared. That veterans looked after each other. That daughters came home when it mattered. 3 days, Emma said. "Can you pretend everything's normal for 3 more days? Sleep in the same house, act like you're surrendering." Harold thought about Korea, about foxholes in winter, about waiting for days without moving for one clear shot. "I survived worse for longer," he said. "I can do 3 days." Outside, the ice storm was turning to snow, the kind of February night that made you think winter would last forever. But somewhere in the distance, Harold thought he could hear spring waiting. The next morning, Harold practiced surrender in the bathroom mirror. "I don't want to fight anymore," he said to his reflection. "Just want it over with." His face looked wrong, too much anger in the eyes, too much steel in the jaw. Diane would see through it in seconds. He tried again, let his shoulders slump, thought about those first weeks after Betty died, when getting out of bed felt like lifting a barn, let that exhaustion show. "I'm too tired for this. You win." "Better." That looked like a man who'd given up. Emma knocked. "Dad, she's calling." Harold's phone buzzed in his pocket, Diane's name on the screen. He let it ring 3 times before answering, made his voice flat, defeated. "Yeah." "Harold." Diane's voice was careful, testing. "I've been thinking about what I said. I was upset. We both were." Yeah. "I want to make this right. Fair for both of us." Harold closed his eyes. Imagined Betty in the kitchen, flour on her hands the way she'd hum while kneading bread, held onto that memory like an anchor. "I don't want to fight," he said. "Just want it done. We can do it clean, Friday, courthouse 10 a.m., all official and legal." A pause. "Marcus should probably be there too. He's been helping me manage some things. Better to have everything transparent." There it was. She was bringing Marcus, walking right into it. "Fine," Harold said. "Friday." He hung up, looked at Emma in the doorway. She bought it? Hook, line, and sinker. Emma's phone was already out. "I'm calling the lawyer." The next 3 days felt like living underwater. Harold went through the motions. Coffee, barn chores, a dinner, while Diane moved through the house like she'd already won. She was packing, not hiding it anymore. Boxes in Emma's old room, Betty's things wrapped in newspaper. Wednesday night, Harold signed papers Diane put in front of him. Preliminary documents, she called them. Just to make Friday easier, he signed them all, watched her smile get wider with each signature. Thursday morning, she made him breakfast. Actual kindness in her voice. Like she could afford generosity now that victory was close. "After tomorrow, we can both move on," she said, pouring his coffee. Fresh starts. Harold ate her eggs, drank her coffee, and thought about every foxhole he'd ever been in. About patience. About how the enemy always got confident right before the trap closed. Thursday night, Diane slept soundly. Harold didn't sleep at all, just lay there in the dark, counting hours. 36, 30, 24. Around midnight, Emma slipped into his room. "Can't sleep either?" "No." She sat on the edge of his bed, something she hadn't done since she was 10, and had nightmares. "You know what Mom would say right now?" "That I'm a damn fool." "No." Emma's voice was soft. "She'd say you're human, that wanting companionship doesn't make you weak, that the shame belongs to the people who exploit that, not to you." Harold's throat closed up. "Your mama was always smarter than me. She'd be proud of you for fighting back, for not just accepting what Diane said about you." Emma stood. "Get some sleep, Dad. Tomorrow we end this." But Harold didn't sleep. Just watched the clock tick toward Friday. Toward the moment when he'd either get his life back or lose everything he'd built. Around 4 a.m., he gave up, made coffee, found Cal already in the kitchen. Couldn't sleep either. Cal said. Thought I'd make sure you weren't thinking of backing out. I'm not. Good. Cal refilled both their cups. Because I've got something else. Dale checked the storage unit last night. Empty. They moved everything out yesterday. Harold's stomach dropped. They're running. Maybe, or getting ready to fence it all after tomorrow. Either way, they're committed. Cal pulled out his phone, showed Harold the empty unit. Whatever happens tomorrow, they can't hide what they already stole. We've got photos of everything. And the sun came up slowly, February light, cold and gray. Harold showered, put on his church suit, the one he'd worn to Betty's funeral. If he was going to watch his marriage end, he'd do it properly dressed. Diane came out of his bedroom around 7, saw him in the suit, raised an eyebrow. You don't need to dress up, it's just paperwork. It's 40 years of my life signing away, Harold said. I'll dress proper. They drove separately. Harold followed Diane's white Camry through town, past the hardware store where Vic had made his jokes, past the church where Barb Henderson had whispered, past all the places that had watched him become a fool. Marcus's truck fell in behind them, the convoy to Harold's Judgment Day, or Diane's. The courthouse parking lot was half empty on a Friday morning. Harold parked, sat in his truck, watching Diane check her makeup in her car mirror. Marcus pulled up beside her, tall, gym-built, the kind of confidence that came from getting away with things. Harold's hands were shaking. He gripped the steering wheel until they stopped. Inside, Emma and Cal were already there. Emma, in a dark suit, looking every inch the insurance fraud investigator she was. Cal, in his church clothes, that same calm he'd had in Korea when mortars were falling. Sheriff Dietrich's here, Emma said quietly. County attorney, too. Marge has the marriage records ready. Harold nodded. Couldn't trust his voice yet. Footsteps on marble. Diane and Marcus coming through the main doors. Diane spotted Harold, smiled that honey-sweet smile she'd used on their wedding day. Ready to make this official? Conference room 2, Emma said. Lawyers waiting. They walked down the hall, Harold, Diane, Marcus, with Emma and Cal behind. Their footsteps echoed off the old stone. Somewhere down the hall, a clock was ticking. Diane opened the conference room door. Stopped. Sheriff Dietrich sat at the table. The county attorney beside him, files spread out. Marge Hopkins by the window, holding the marriage registry. What's this? Diane's voice went sharp. Ms. Webb, Mr. Webb, please have a seat. Moem. The county attorney, Frank Morrison, Harold had known him 30 years, gestured to chairs. It's Whitaker. Mrs. Whitaker. Actually, no. Frank placed a document on the table. It's not. The marriage certificate. Diane Marie Webb married to Marcus Anthony Webb, October 14, 2012. Status active. Diane's face went very still. Marcus looked at her, then at the certificate, then at the sheriff. I can explain. Save it. Frank opened another file. We have photographs. 3 weeks of documentation. You and Mr. Webb removing property from Harold Whitaker's farm and placing it in a storage unit rented under your name. He spread Cal's photos across the table. Diane and Marcus loading equipment, the china cabinet, tools, Betty's things. We have a recording. Frank pressed play on his phone. Marcus's voice filled the room. Easy money, man. These old guys, lonely as hell, desperate for company. This is our 4th one. Got a system now. Marcus went pale. That was taken out of context. We have the storage unit rental agreement, Frank continued. Paid 6 months in advance. 2 weeks before you married Mr. Whitaker. We have fraudulent deed transfers obtained through deception. And we have 3 prior victims in Illinois and Indiana, with identical patterns. Sheriff Dietrich stood. Ma'am, sir, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and bigamy. Diane tried one last time. Turned to the sheriff with tears starting. Real or performed. Harold couldn't tell anymore. He pursued me. I was trying to help him. He was so confused after his wife died. I didn't know Marcus hadn't finalized our divorce, Ms. Webb. Sheriff Dietrich's voice was tired, like he'd heard every con in the book twice. Save it for your lawyer. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus bolted, jumped up from his chair and ran for the door. His boots slipped on the polished marble floor. He went down hard, slid into the wall with a sound like a sack of grain hitting concrete. Deputy Morrison, 72 years old, should have retired a decade ago, walked over and cuffed him. Son, I'm 72, and I just caught you without breaking a sweat. Think about that. Through the conference room window, Harold could see people watching. Vic from the hardware store, Barb Henderson from church, Dale from the storage facility. The town that had watched him become a fool was now watching something else. Sheriff Dietrich cuffed Diane. Read her rights in that flat official voice that meant this was real, this was happening. Diane looked at Harold one last time. The honey was gone, the performance over. What looked back was cold and empty. You'll still die alone, old man. Harold stood. 40 years of farming had given him a back straight as a fence post when he wanted it. I reckon that's so. But I'll die with my name intact. You think you will? They let her out. Marcus first, limping and swearing. Then Diane, head high, still acting like she was the victim in all this. The conference room went quiet. Just Harold, Emma, Cal, and the officials who'd made this possible. Frank Morrison stood, shook Harold's hand. Takes courage to do what you did. A lot of folks just accept it, too ashamed to fight back. Wasn't courage. Was just refusing to let her win. Sometimes that's the same thing. Outside in the hallway, people were watching through the windows. Harold walked out to find Vic waiting. Harold, Vic stuck out his hand. I'm sorry for the jokes, for assuming you're tougher than you look. Tough enough. Marge approached, files in her arms. The marriage is voided. The property transfers are nullified. It'll take some time to process everything, but legally, it's like none of it happened. Except it did happen. Harold had still been fool enough to fall for it. Still, been desperate enough to ignore every red flag. But he'd also been strong enough to fight back. Cal touched his shoulder. Let's get you home. They walked out of the courthouse into February sunshine. That was finally starting to feel like it might. Remember spring, Emma on one side, Cal on the other, the three of them heading to their trucks while the town watched. Harold didn't feel victorious. Didn't feel triumphant. Just felt like a man who'd survived something he shouldn't have had to survive in the first place. But survived it, he had. And sometimes that was enough. 6 weeks later, Harold sat on his porch on an April morning that smelled like mud and new grass. The ice was finally gone. The fields were ready for planting. The neighbor's tractor hummed in the distance, getting an early start on the season. Emma came out with coffee. 2 mugs, steam rising in the cool air. Mail came, she said, handing him a cup. Prosecutor says they're pleading out. 8 to 10 years, both of them. The other victims are filing civil suits too. Harold nodded, didn't feel satisfaction exactly, just a kind of tired relief. The guy from Fort Wayne called. Wanted to thank you. Emma sat in Betty's old rocking chair. Said if you hadn't stepped forward, he'd have thought he was the only one. Said it helped, knowing it wasn't personal, that they did this professionally. Doesn't make it easier. No, but it makes it different. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from 6 weeks of sorting through Betty's things together, 6 weeks of undoing what Diane had tried to erase. Emma had stayed, working remotely from her old bedroom, helping Harold rebuild the life that had been picked apart. The quilt was inside, spread on Harold's bed. Emma had spent 2 evenings repairing the tear, her stitches nearly as tight as Betty's. Not quite. Betty had 43 years of practice, but close enough. I've been thinking, Emma said, about moving back. Not to the farm, but maybe an apartment in town. There's that place above the bookstore. Harold looked at his daughter. Betty's eyes. Betty's way of saying important things casual-like. You don't have to do that. I know, but maybe I want to. She turned her mug in her hands. Someone should keep an eye on you. Don't need a babysitter. Good. I'm not offering one. I'm offering family. She met his eyes. I should have been here before. I was wrong about that. About leaving you alone because I was hurt. You came when it mattered. 3 years too late. No. Harold's voice was firm. Right on time. A sound at the porch steps. They both turned. Rusty stood there. The dog who'd been hiding in the barn for 2 months, who'd refused to come in the house while Diane was there. Now he approached, slow, tail uncertain, sniffing the air. Harold set down his coffee, kneeled. Come here, boy. Rusty crept forward, sniffed Harold's hand, recognized him, accepted that whatever threat had been in this house was gone. The dog circled 3 times and lay down at Harold's feet with a sigh that sounded like coming home. He knew, Emma said softly. Animals always know. Harold reached down, scratched behind Rusty's ears. The dog's tail thumped against the porch boards, that simple, solid sound of life continuing. They sat watching the fields, drinking coffee, while April morning turned to afternoon. Cal's truck appeared on the road around noon, pulling into the drive. Thought you might need help with the tractor, Cal said, climbing out, springtime and all. But they all knew he wasn't here about the tractor. Was here because that's what friends did. Showed up. Stayed present. Made sure you weren't facing the days alone. I appreciate it. Also brought lunch. Cal held up a bag from the diner. Figured Emma can't cook any better than you can. Emma laughed. First real laugh Harold had heard from her in years. He's not wrong. They ate on the porch. Burgers and fries that tasted like every Friday Harold and Betty had ever skipped cooking. Like normal life. Resuming after the storm. You think you'll ever... Emma started, then stopped. You know, date again? Harold surprised himself by laughing. Actually laughing, not the fake sound he'd made in Vic's hardware store. Maybe when I'm too old to know better. You're already too old to know better, Emma said. That's what saved you. Harold considered that. Saved me from what? From not being alone. There's worse things than lonely, Dad. She was right. Diane had been right about one thing. Harold would probably die alone. Most people did, even the married ones. Betty had died with Harold holding her hand, but she'd still gone somewhere he couldn't follow. The question wasn't whether you died alone. The question was whether you died as yourself. Whether you kept your name, your land, your dignity intact. Harold had done that. Barely. But he'd done it. Your mama used to say that, he told Emma, about there being worse things than lonely. I know. I remember. The afternoon stretched long and easy. Cal helped Harold check the tractor. Emma made phone calls about the apartment above the bookstore. Rusty followed Harold to the barn and back, making up for lost time. Around 4, Emma started packing her car, not leaving for good, just heading to Indianapolis to get more of her things, sign the lease on the apartment, start the process of coming home. I'll be back Monday, she said, hugging Harold at her car. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone. Like what? Like signing anything, marrying anyone, the usual. Harold smiled. I'll try to restrain myself. He watched her drive away, then watched Cal's truck follow a few minutes later. And just like that, he was alone again, on his farm. But it felt different now. Not the hollow loneliness that had made him vulnerable. This was the kind you chose. The kind that came with keeping yourself intact. Harold sat back down on the porch, Rusty's head on his knee, coffee going cold in the evening air. The sun touching the horizon, painting the fields gold. He thought about Diane's last words. You'll still die alone. She'd meant it as a curse. But maybe it was just the truth everyone had to make peace with. And Harold had made his peace. The evening settled around him like a familiar coat. Spring peepers started up in the pond, that sound that meant winter had finally let go. Harold sat with his coffee growing cold, Rusty sleeping at his feet, and talked to Betty like he'd been doing for 18 months. Well, Betty, I made a mess of things after you left. The words felt foolish, spoken out loud, but they also felt necessary. Like something that needed saying to the evening air, to the farm, to whatever part of Betty still lived in the porch boards and the windbreak trees. Tried to fill the space you left behind. Turns out that can't be done. Some spaces aren't meant to be filled, just lived with. A car passed on the county road. Emma, probably, heading back to Indianapolis. Or maybe just neighbors going about their evening. The world continuing like it always did. Emma's back, though. That's something. That's more than something. Harold thought about those 30 days of rejection, about lying awake wondering what was wrong with him, about being too ashamed to tell anyone he was being refused in his own bed by his own wife, about how Diane had known exactly which wounds to press on. You're too old, too confused, too lonely. No one will believe you. She'd been wrong, but she'd also been close enough to write that Harold had almost surrendered. The thing is, he said to the empty air, to Betty's memory, to himself, she wasn't wrong about the dying alone part. I probably will. But I reckon everyone does, even the ones who aren't. Rusty stirred, resettled. The porch boards creaked in the temperature change between day and night. You did, even with me right there holding your hand. There's a place we all go that nobody else can follow. Harold closed his eyes, felt the April evening on his face. Not warm yet, but getting there. The promise of summer in the air. Question isn't whether you die alone. Question is whether you die as yourself. Whether you kept your name, your dignity, whether you stood your ground when standing mattered. He opened his eyes. The sun was nearly down, painting the clouds orange and purple, the kind of sunset Betty used to make him stop and watch, even when he had work to do. I did that, barely. Had help from folks I didn't expect, and folks I should have known would come through, but I did it. Emma's car appeared on the road, coming back, not going. She must have forgotten something, or maybe she'd just turned around. Decided one more night at home, before heading back to the city. Harold stood, his knees creaking like the porch boards. 67 years of living, showing in every joint. But he stood straight, walked inside to tell Emma the coffee was still warm if she wanted some. Behind him, Rusty got up and followed, the dog who'd known all along, who'd hidden until the threat was gone, and come back when the house was safe again. Some things you survived by outlasting, by refusing to break, by standing in your own kitchen, on your own land, and saying this far, no further. This had been one of those things. Harold poured 2 cups of coffee. Heard Emma's car door close, her footsteps on the porch, Rusty's tail thumping greeting. Outside, the spring peepers sang. The fields waited for planting. The farm that had been his grandfather's, his father's, Betty's, and his continued being itself. Land didn't care about human drama. It just waited for whoever would tend it next. Harold handed Emma her coffee. Thought you left. Thought about it, decided to stay tonight instead. She smiled. Fresh start Monday. And they stood in the kitchen, Betty's kitchen, the one where she'd made 43 years of meals and memories. The one Diane had tried to claim and failed. Your mama would have liked this, Harold said. You being here. Not the rest of it, but this part. I know, Dad. I know. Outside, full dark was falling. The kind of April evening that promised good things. Planting weather, growing season. The world turning green again after the long winter. Harold Whitaker stood in his kitchen with his daughter and his dog and his coffee, and for the first time in months, he was exactly where he needed to be. Some victories looked like parades and celebration. Others looked like standing in your own house on your own terms, with the people who'd shown up when it mattered. This was the second kind, and that Harold figured was enough.